Since April, U.S., European, and Australian leaders have made frequent trips to the Indo-Pacific region, seeking to establish close relations with countries that share common values. German Chancellor and the European Union President visited Japan. The EU President and Australia Deputy Prime Minister visited India. The U.S. President visited Japan and South Korea. It highlights the Western allies' strategic focus and the important role these Asian countries play in the security of the region. Meanwhile, China also made a move to change its direction. Let's take a closer look at the recent diplomatic maneuvers by China and the West and see how China is faring. Hello everyone, I'm Lei. Welcome to Lei's Real Talk. Russia's war in Ukraine did not change the United States' strategic focus on the Pacific region, but it did prompt the EU, which had previously avoided the issue of Taiwan for fear of provoking Beijing, to pay attention to the Pacific region. The Russia-Ukraine war brought about greater international attention to the China-Taiwan situation. The role that Japan, South Korea, and India play in countering the CCP has been increasingly under the spotlight. Japan has accelerated its military buildup in recent years. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has repeatedly stressed that today's Ukraine could be tomorrow's East Asia, and unilateral changes to the status quo by force in the Indo-Pacific region, especially in East Asia, must not be allowed. Furthermore, the Japanese Prime Minister for the first time attended the NATO summit held in Madrid from June 28th to 30th. Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party has taken the extraordinary step of proposing to double the country's defense spending from 1% of GDP to 2% over the next 5 years. Recently, several Japanese politicians also proposed to revisit Japan's nuclear weapons policy, which currently stipulates that Japan won't possess, manufacture, or bring in nuclear weapons. In May, at the EU-Japan summit, the EU and Japan pledged to deepen our exchanges on China, notably with regard to political, economic, and security dynamics, including on the situation in Hong Kong as well as on human rights. On May 5th, the UK and Japan signed a reciprocal access agreement to strengthen defense cooperation. Japan, ranking 5th in the world for overall military power in the global firepower rankings, is the one country in the Asia-Pacific region that could really change the regional balance of power. Lyle Goldstein of Defense Priorities, a Washington-based think tank, said Japan's increased self-defense capabilities could be more of a deterrent and worrisome to Beijing than Japan and South Korea's strengthened ties with NATO. South Korea's new president, Yoon Suk-yeol, changed his predecessor's pro-China position and has given priority to a Korea-US alliance. President Yoon expressed his willingness to participate in the American-led Quad, a strategic security dialogue between Japan, Australia, India, and the United States. Also, in contrast to his predecessor's policy of engagement with North Korea, Yoon focuses on military deterrence against North Korea, therefore marginalizing Beijing's role on the Korean peninsula. South Korea has changed its policy of relying on the U.S. for security and on China for the economy to a new policy of free and secure trade. After joining the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, or IPEF, South Korea announced that it will join the U.S.-led Minerals Security Partnership, or MSP, to break away from its dependence on China. South Korea's business community has already been more pro-American than its politicians. Voice of America reported that based on data from the Export-Import Bank of Korea, from 2012 to 2021, South Korea's investment in China increased from $4.3 billion to $6.7 billion, an increase of 56%, while its investment in the United States jumped from $5.9 billion to $27.6 billion, an increase of 368%. South Korea's relations with China have always been crucial to Beijing. The last thing Beijing wants to see is a trilateral security alliance between the U.S., Japan, and South Korea, but this is happening. The Korean president not only attended the NATO summit in Madrid, but also abandoned his former grudge and is cooperating with Japan in trilateral security coordination. According to Kyodo News, Japan, South Korea, and the United States began a trilateral talk during the NATO summit in Madrid. South Korea's presidential office also announced that it would open a representative office with NATO in Brussels. The world's largest democratic country, India, has a unique role in the current geopolitics. India did not join the West in denouncing Russia, but the Russia-Ukraine war has elevated India's international stature as the United States. The EU, Australia, China, and Russia are all courting India. The country is part of BRICS, the network comprised of 5 emerging major world economies: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. It is also part of the Quad. India is the only country in the Quad that shares a border with China, and a disputed one at that. It is also one of the very few countries to have faced the Chinese military on the field in recent years after the border clashes of 2020. However, India's historical reluctance to be involved in political alliances has made India want to ensure that its membership in the Quad isn't against China. The blandness of the Quad's joint statements often reflects India's sensitivity. Some experts believe that the United States would not expect India to contribute to a war in Taiwan, but India's participation in the Quad is important as it draws the CCP's attention to the India-China border in the Himalayas. Although India doesn't want to be seen as being part of an alliance that's overtly against China, it has benefited from this alliance. After the Russia-Ukraine war began, the status of India and China in Europe seems to be one is rising and one falling. After the EU froze the China-Europe investment agreement last May, Europe has been exploring the possibilities of India becoming the next China for Europe. In April, the EU and India announced the EU-India Trade and Technology Council. The EU also restarted free trade talks with India, with the vision that India may replace China in the future as a major source of supply chains for Europe. The developments concerning these Asian countries and their alliances with the West certainly worry China. The day before Xi Jinping spoke with Vladimir Putin on June 15th, Le Yucheng was removed from his post as Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs and was demoted to Deputy Director of the State Administration of Radio and Television. The move was surprising as Le was considered the candidate to succeed Wang Yi as China's next foreign minister. Le studied Russian, served twice in the Chinese embassy in Moscow, and is Xi's #1 Russia specialist. After the Xi-Putin meeting in Beijing in February, Le publicly said that there is no ceiling in the Sino-Russian relations, a statement that still haunts Beijing today. The Taipei branch director of the Japanese newspaper Sankei Shimbun wrote on Facebook that Le's departure is a signal on whether Beijing will continue to support Russia. And in a June 23rd article, Nikkei Asia said that Le's pro-Russian stance would prevent China from mediating between Russia and Ukraine. With its poor diplomatic scorecard, Beijing was forced to do some damage control. Special Envoy Wu Hongbo was sent to Europe for a 3-week tour to repair the Sino-European relations. On his Europe tour, Wu repeatedly admitted to mistakes on behalf of the regime over its COVID handling, wolf warrior diplomacy, and economic mismanagement. Before Wu, Beijing had dispatched another special envoy, Huo Yuzhen, to Europe in April, trying to save the 16+1 investment cooperation platform with Central and Eastern European countries. Lithuania pulled out last year. The Czech Republic also wants to exit, citing unfulfilled expectations. This year is the club's 10th anniversary. To help Beijing save face, the Chinese envoy suggested that future 16+1 meetings be downgraded to the level of foreign ministers. Comparing himself to the Cheshire Cat in Alice in Wonderland, one European official said, We smile and then disappear. We don't raise our voices, but we ignore all 16+1 invitations. Such is Beijing's latest predicament in international affairs. That's all for today's program. Thank you, and I'll see you soon.